Okay, so with that, let's start with an overview of Visum, and we'll first start with file structure in Visum. So whenever you open a model setup, you would always find different kinds of files, and sometimes you might wonder, what this file is for, or what does this file extension mean, if this is important, or if you can delete it. You might have such questions. So this is what we are going to cover in this section. We'll go over different file types or different file extensions that you might encounter when you are working with NERPMAB, and we'll talk through what each of these file extensions are for, what is their purpose, how do they get used in the model, how you can create them, and how you can reuse them in future. So we had shared a download link to download the model setup, and I think that the download would include two folders. The first two zip files. The first zip file will be by this name called NERPMAB, and then there's another zip file which contains a few other files. We'll use the other zip folder for tomorrow's session. For today, we are going to mainly focus on nerpmab.zip. So if you haven't downloaded it yet, I would encourage you to download that, because we'll be going through that in today's session. And once you unzip that folder, you would see a directory structure like what you see on the screen right now. And the first file that we are going to talk about are the versions file. You see those two files at the bottom of this directory structure here, and they go by the file extension .ver. So these are called version files, and this is the primary file that you would open when you're working with any Visum model. It contains all the data that is needed for a model. It contains all the network data, the polygon, zones, nodes, intersections, and all the associated attributes of those network objects. So you're working with any Visum model, this is the primary file that you would go to. This is the primary file that you would open. And the 2015 version file has all the network inputs and everything for the base year, which is 2015 in this model. And then there is another version file, which is NERPM D2 2045_MAZ. And that file, as the name suggests, would have the network and all the data for the forecast scenario, the 2045 forecast scenario. So these are the version file. Now the next set of files that you might see are what are called as list layouts file. And all these files are grouped in the listings subdirectory. So what are list layouts? So in Visum, you can, for each network object, there is some sort of associated data. So for, let's say for links, there'll be things like the speed on each link, and the capacity of each link, and number of lanes, and so on. And there are a lot of attributes when it comes to developing a model. And when you're but for your specific modeling task, you may not want to look at all the attributes and scroll through all of them at the same time. So instead, you might want to look at a subset of those attributes. And once you like your selection of attributes and the settings in which the tabular data is displayed, you can save those settings for reuse in the future. When you want to look at the same, you want to do the same modeling task repeated, then you can load those settings. So those settings which sort of freeze the schema or the view of these lists are called as list layouts, and they go by the extension .llax. So during this training, we would cover how you can actually create a list layout, and how you can use a previously saved list layout. So we'll go through that. So those were list layouts. Now another set of files that you would come across are Python scripts, and these are in the scripts subdirectory. So Visum has a very powerful Python API, and a lot of the processes can be automated by use of Python scripts. So Python scripts in NERPMAB are used for various purposes. They could be used to interface with various third-party tools and software, such as for calling DaySim or for calling population sim, or they can also be used for performing or automating various modeling tasks, such as coming up with generating trips for auxiliary models and things like that. So Python scripts, the extension is .py, and typically for a typical use of this model, you would not have to you update or configure these files in any way. So these are sort of there in the background, and these get called by Visum to perform specific tasks. But a normal user would not need to change these in any way. But you are welcome to look at these if you want. If you're interested, you can open these using a text editor, or if you have a Python IDE, you can use that to open these. And later we'll look, when we go through the Visum interface, we'll talk more about how you can use Python to access Visum objects and do calculations on the fly. But these are like another set of files that you would come across when you're using NERPMAB. Okay, so next set of files are the graphic parameter settings file, and these go by the extension .gpa, and you'll find these files in the graphics subdirectory. So these are similar to list layouts in terms of functionality. So list layouts were to store settings or schema for list data or tabular data, and graphic parameter settings are more to save settings for or to save visual settings. So let's say you after you completed an assignment, you want the link flows to be displayed in a certain way for a very specific analysis. And then you want to save those settings for future use. When you do another run, you want to do a similar visual analysis. So you can save those visual settings in a graphic parameters settings file. So again, in this training, we'll go through how to create some of these GPAs and how GPA files, and how to reload them, for repetitive tasks. Okay. So another set of files are the filter files, and the extension is .fil, and you'll find these files in the filters subdirectory. So the purpose of filter files, as the name suggests, is to filter various objects in Visum. So for example, you might want to look at only transit links, or the links that allow only transit on them, because you want to, it could be, just want to visualize where those links are on the network, or you might want to look at the data for those links, and you might want to mass edit one of the attribute for those links. So this feature comes in very handy. You can create a filter file, and we'll talk about this again later in more detail, where I'll walk you through how to create these filter files and also how to use them. And these can be included in the model flow, and this simply automates the process, various modeling tasks. It makes it very easy to filter and mass edit filtered objects. Okay, and then another set of files are the procedure sequence files. Sometimes they are referred to as procedure parameter files. and the extension for these files is .xml, and you would find these files in the procedures subdirectory. So these files in Visum, procedure sequence is sort of a framework where you can tell Visum what operations to implement and in what sequence. And for different modeling tasks, the number of operations or the type of operations and the sequence of operation might change. So instead of manually changing the sequence or adding or removing operations, you can save a procedure sequence file for future use. So for example, you only want to do an assignment and then do a select click analysis. You might have a procedure sequence for that. And then once you're done with your assignment, you can simply load that procedure sequence file and load the paths and do a select link analysis. So that's the purpose of procedure sequence files. And again, we'll go through these as we go through the training. We'll come across procedure sequence files more and how to save them and how to load them for repetitive modeling tasks. So those are procedure sequence files. And then there are a lot of other types of files as well. You may not necessarily find these file extensions in the NERPMAB setup, but when you're working with a Visum model, it's common to see these types of files such as .NET network files or a transfer file .tra or a demand structure file .dmd. This is just, if you come across these files, then you would at least know that they are useful files and what their purpose is. But in this model, you may not find these in the model setup. And of course, there are a lot of third-party files as well that you may interact with when you're working with a Visum model. There you can import or export shape files. There is OpenStreetMap and then GTFS files. You could also have in some models you may have databases like SQLite, etc. So these are like some third-party files which Visum could interact with such files, and you might come across such files when you're working with a Visum model. Okay, so I think those were just an overview of different file structure or different types of files that you would see in NERPMAB model, just to get you familiar with when you see a file, you would know what's the purpose of that file and if they are important and how to use them.